If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. The sun had barely risen when Lara Rivers woke up that Saturday morning. At 8 years old, she already had the responsibility of helping her mother, Mrs. Joanna, with the household chores. They lived in a community on the outskirts of Brighton, a few miles from the historic quarter, where the wind carried the smell of the sea, mixed with the aroma of fried bean fritters from the street vendors of the lanes. But on that particular morning, Lara wasn't thinking about chores. Her gaze was fixed on the object, leaning in the corner of the room she shared with her younger brother, a dented flute, held together by colorful adhesive tape. The instrument had been a gift from her father Sterling, a worker at the old Harmony Instruments factory. "Lara, come have breakfast, girl," Mrs. Joanna called from the small kitchen. Lara picked up the flute carefully, as one would hold a treasure, and put it in a worn backpack. This would be a special day. After weeks of gathering courage, she was finally going to the Royal Pavilion Theatre, where the final stage of the Brighton's Rising Stars competition, an event that had gained fame throughout the country, would take place. "Mum, I'm going to make it," Lara said as she nibbled on a piece of bread. "I'm going to play just like Dad taught me." Mrs. Joanna smiled, but her eyes held a mix of pride and worry. Ever since Sterling suffered the accident at the factory, which left him with permanent injuries preventing him from working, life had become even harder. He spent most of his time in the hospital, fighting for every day of life. Joanna cleaned houses and sold coconut candies on the beach to support her children. "Daughter, those people there, they won't understand your music," Joanna said, adjusting the girl's curly hair. "The world isn't fair to those who don't have money." "Dad always said that true music doesn't need luxury," Lara replied, repeating the words Sterling had told her so many times. "He taught me that the most beautiful music comes from broken places." The bus to the city centre was crowded that morning. Lara, barefoot and in her simple printed cotton dress, held her backpack tight against her chest. The flute was her only link to the afternoons when Sterling, even tired after exhausting shifts at the factory, dedicated a few hours to teaching her music. "When life is too hard to speak, we let the flute speak for us," he used to say. Upon arriving at the Royal Pavilion Theatre, Lara felt intimidated. The imposing building, with its majestic columns and marble staircase, seemed from another world compared to the dirt roads of her community. Well-dressed children, some with expensive instruments in leather cases, entered accompanied by proud parents. "Your name, please?" asked a receptionist, looking strangely at the barefoot girl. "Lara Rivers," she replied timidly. "I'm here for the competition." The woman consulted a list. "I don't see your name here. I didn't sign up before. I thought I could do it now." The receptionist sighed. "Registrations closed 2 weeks ago." "I'm sorry." Lara felt her world collapse. She had saved her bus fare for weeks, practiced every day. Her eyes filled with tears. "What's going on here?" a deep voice asked. Lara turned and saw a tall man in an impeccable suit with graying hair at his temples. She recognized him immediately from magazines and TV shows. Ronald Vance, the renowned British flutist, famous for his international tours and difficult temperament. "This girl wants to participate." "But she's not registered," the receptionist explained. Ronald looked at Lara, noticing her bare feet and worn backpack. A scornful smile crossed his lips. "And what do you play, little one?" "Flute," Lara replied, gathering courage. "My father taught me." "Your father must be a great musician, then," Ronald commented ironically. "He's a factory worker. He used to work at the Harmony Instruments factory." Something in Ronald's face changed for an instant, almost imperceptibly. He quickly composed himself. "Let me see your instrument." With trembling hands, Lara took the flute from her backpack. The dented metal, repaired with adhesive tape in several places, contrasted sharply with the silver and gold flute Ronald carried in a velvet case. A laugh escaped the musician's lips, attracting the attention of people around. Some other competitors approached, curious. "That's not an instrument, it's scrap metal," Ronald said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Do you really think you can compete with that?" Lara felt her face burn with shame, but something inside her strengthened. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "The truest music is born where life hurts." "Yes, I can play," she affirmed, lifting her face. My father said it's not the instrument that makes the music, it's the heart. Ronald's smile became more pronounced. He looked at the cameras recording the backstage of the competition for a Brighton TV documentary. You know what we're going to do? A flute duel here and now. If you beat me, I'll personally guarantee your registration in the competition and more. I'll pay for 5 years of study at the best music school in the country. The audience that had formed let out exclamations of surprise. And if I lose? Lara asked. If you lose, you admit that dreams don't pay bills and that this thing, he pointed to the dented flute, belongs in the trash. Lara hesitated. She thought of her father in the hospital, her mother cleaning houses, the nights when there wasn't enough food. 5 years of study would completely change her future. I accept, she finally said. The buzz increased. Someone suggested they hold the duel on the main stage, as the competition wouldn't start until the afternoon. In minutes, Lara found herself being led to the majestic stage of the Royal Pavilion Theatre, illuminated by spotlights that momentarily blinded her. Ronald ascended beside her, his impeccable posture contrasting with the girl's tense shoulders. He took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a surprise before the official start of the competition. This young lady believes she can compete with a flute repaired with adhesive tape. Let's teach a lesson about the difference between childish dreams and the reality of art. A tense silence fell over the Royal Pavilion Theatre. Brighton TV cameras, originally there only to record promotional material for the competition, now captured every moment of that unexpected confrontation. The show's producer, Paul Martin, couldn't hide his smile. This would generate extraordinary viewership. Ronald Vance adjusted the lapel microphone they had hastily given him and addressed the small audience made up of theatre staff, festival competitors, and a few curious people who had entered to escape the Brighton heat. I will begin by demonstrating what true technique is, years of discipline and formal study, he announced with a superior smile. I will perform a passage from Johann Sebastian Bach's Partita in a minor, a piece that demands absolute mastery of the instrument. He positioned his silver and gold flute, took a deep breath, and began to play. His fingers moved with impressive precision over the polished keys, extracting crystalline notes that filled the theatre with a cascade of perfectly executed sounds. Every trill, every ornament, was performed with mathematical precision that demonstrated years of rigorous study. When he finished, enthusiastic applause echoed through the theatre. Ronald bowed elegantly, savouring the admiration. He then turned to Lara with a challenging smile. Your turn, he said, extending his arm towards the centre of the stage. Lara walked slowly, her bare feet making almost no sound on the wooden floor. The bright lights made her seem even smaller, more fragile. She held the dented flute with both hands, as if fearing it might fall apart at any moment. What will you play for us? Ronald asked, his condescending tone barely disguised. A song my father taught me, Lara replied in a low but firm voice. It's called Meditation by Master Pixington. Something in Ronald's gaze wavered for an instant. He knew the piece well, a classic of Brazilian choro, but he didn't expect a child from the periphery to mention Pixington, much less attempt to play one of his works. Lara closed her eyes for a moment, remembering her father's words. Don't just play the notes, daughter. Tell a story with them. She brought the flute to her lips and began. The first notes came out shaky, hesitant. The sound was rough, without the metallic polish of Ronald's flute. Some spectators exchanged looks of embarrassment, others of pity. Paul Martin, the producer, shook his head, anticipating a fiasco. But then something began to change. As Lara progressed through the melody, her body relaxed. The music flowed not just from her damaged flute, but from her entire being. With her eyes closed, she wasn't playing for the audience or the cameras, she was playing for her father, for the afternoons when he returned exhausted from the factory and still found the energy to teach her the old Brazilian melodies. The husky sound of the dented flute transformed into something different. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't crystalline like Ronald's, but it carried a painful truth, a story of struggle, of resilience. Pixington's melody, in her small, calloused hands, gained a new, almost transcendental dimension. It was as if the entire theatre could see, through those imperfect notes, the dirt roads of the community, the hospital where her father fought for his life, the sweat of her mother selling coconut candies under the scorching Brighton sun. When the last note dissipated into the air, the theatre remained in absolute silence for a few seconds. Then, like a wave that starts gently and gains strength, the applause began. It wasn't polite applause. It was visceral, emotional. Some people visibly had tears in their eyes. Lara opened her eyes, surprised by the reaction. She looked at Ronald, who remained motionless, his face an indecipherable mask. "This proves nothing," he said finally, but his voice no longer had its previous firmness. "Cheap emotion is not art. Technique is what separates amateurs from professionals." But the audience disagreed. Paul Martin, sensing the moment, approached the stage with a microphone. "What we just witnessed was extraordinary," he declared. "A true demonstration of the transformative power of music. And what did you think? Who won this unexpected duel?" The answer came in the form of thunderous applause for Lara. Someone shouted, "The flute girl!" Others repeated the chorus. Ronald watched the scene with a mixture of disbelief and irritation. How could they prefer that technically flawed performance to his impeccable one? "I believe we have a winner," Paul continued, seizing the televised moment. "And according to the rules of the challenge itself, Lara Rivers has just secured her participation in the Brighton's Rising Stars competition and a 5-year scholarship to the best music school in the country." The audience erupted in more applause. Lara, still stunned by everything that was happening, could barely believe it. Her dream of formally studying music, something that seemed as distant as the stars, suddenly became palpable. Ronald, however, was not satisfied. He approached Paul and whispered something in his ear. The producer nodded, turning back to the audience. "Ronald Vance would like to say a few words," he announced. The famous flutist took the microphone, regaining his elegant posture. "What we saw here was, without a doubt, touching," he said with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But this competition is about musical excellence, not about moving stories. I propose that young Lara participate in the official competition this afternoon. If she manages to impress the judges, professionals with solid musical training, not an audience swayed by momentary emotion, I will fulfill my promise. Otherwise, our little street artist will learn a valuable lesson about the real world of music." There were murmurs of disapproval among the audience. Paul, sensing the tension, intervened quickly. "Well, it seems we have an exciting development. Lara Rivers will face the official challenge of the Brighton's Rising Stars competition this afternoon. Don't miss it!" As people commented excitedly, Lara remained center stage, holding her dented flute. Ronald approached her. "Don't think you've won anything today," he said in a low voice. "What you did wasn't real music. It was luck, it was emotional manipulation. Let's see how you fare before judges who understand what real art is." Before Lara could respond, a woman in her 60s with grey hair neatly tied in a bun approached. She wore a simple but elegant suit, and her eyes, behind gold-rimmed glasses, examined Lara intently. "Exceptional interpretation, young lady," she said. "I'm Beatrice Wells, a retired music professor from the Brighton Conservatory of Music. I'd like to talk to you before this afternoon's competition." Ronald looked at the woman with evident displeasure. "Professor Beatrice, I didn't expect to see you here. I came to check if there's still truth in concert music," she replied with a serene smile. "And apparently I found it in an unexpected place." The look they exchanged contained years of some unresolved conflict. Ronald walked away without saying anything more, while Beatrice gently led Lara off stage. Backstage, the professor offered the girl a glass of water, who was still trembling slightly from the whole experience. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Beatrice asked. "My father taught me," Lara replied, holding the glass of water with both hands. "He worked at the Harmony Instruments factory before the accident. Now he's in the hospital." "For a long time." Beatrice's eyes lit up with interest. "Your father, what's his name?" "Sterling." "Sterling Rivers." Beatrice brought her hand to her mouth in a gesture of genuine surprise. "Sterling Rivers, Master Julian's apprentice." It was Lara's turn to be surprised. You know my father and Master Julian. My father talked about him a lot. He was like a second father to him." A warm smile illuminated the professor's face. "Master Julian Oliver was one of the greatest flutists this country has ever produced, although few formally recognize him. He was never interested in fame or luxurious theatres like this one. He preferred to play in choro circles, teach for free in public squares, keep the soul of Brazilian music alive. Beatrice paused as if revisiting cherished memories. I met your father through the master. Sterling had an extraordinary natural talent. Julian used to say he had the breath of truth. That's what my father always tells me. Lara interrupted, enthusiastic. That music isn't in the fingers, it's in the breath, in the story we want to tell. Beatrice nodded, moved. That's Master Julian's philosophy. He believed that technique without soul was just organized noise. At this moment, they were interrupted by a woman in uniform who informed Lara that she needed to officially register for the afternoon competition. Beatrice accompanied her to the registration desk, where Paul Martin was already filling out the forms. Professor Beatrice, the producer, greeted her with evident respect. I didn't know you knew our young sensation. I just met her, Beatrice replied, but I've known her music for a long time through her father. Paul seemed intrigued, but was too busy with event preparations to ask more questions. After finalizing Lara's registration, he handed her a badge and a competition program. You'll perform last, he explained. The highlight of the evening, thanks to our little morning duel. When they moved away, Beatrice gently touched Lara's shoulder. I have a proposal for you. Would you like me to help you prepare for tonight's performance? I live nearby. We can use a few hours to work on your piece. Lara hesitated. I need to tell my mother. She must be worried. I only left home to try to register. I didn't expect to stay all day. Of course, Beatrice smiled. Let's find a phone for you to call her. After a brief conversation with Mrs. Joanna, who could barely believe the turn the day had taken, Lara accompanied Beatrice to her apartment, a modest but cozy place in the Kemptown neighborhood with a sea view. The walls were covered with old photographs of musicians, many of them in choro circles and serenades. Sit down, Beatrice invited, pointing to a comfortable sofa. I'll prepare a snack for us. While the professor was busy in the kitchen, Lara walked around the living room, observing the photographs. In one of them, she immediately recognized her father's face, much younger, next to a gray-haired black man with a wide smile, holding a flute. In the background, several musicians formed a circle, some with guitars, ukuleles, and tambourines. That's your father with Master Julian, said Beatrice, returning with a tray of juice and sandwiches. That photo was taken at the Brighton Market Hall, at one of the choro circles that used to happen on Sundays. Lara approached the photograph, noticing something she hadn't immediately realized. A young man with a serious expression, looking out of place among the smiling musicians. Who is that? She asked, pointing. Beatrice hesitated for a moment. That's Ronald Vance, she finally replied. Master Julian's son. The revelation hit Lara like a shock. The arrogant man who had challenged her, who had ridiculed her dented flute, was the son of her father's musical mentor. But how? He seems so different from what you say about Master Julian. Beatrice sighed, placing the tray on the coffee table. It's a complicated story, Lara. Ronald and his father had a difficult relationship. Julian wanted his son to understand the soul of Brazilian music, but Ronald was always fascinated by European virtuosity, by technique, by formal perfection. She paused, pouring juice for Lara. When Ronald was about 18, he got a scholarship to study at the Paris Conservatory. It was against his father's wishes, who believed he was moving away from his roots. They had a terrible fight. Ronald left for Europe and hardly kept in touch. When he returned years later, he was already an internationally recognized flutist. Julian had fallen ill, but Ronald rarely visited him. And what happened to Master Julian? Lara asked, feeling a deep sadness for the story. He continued teaching until he no longer had the strength, Beatrice replied, her eyes welling up with the memory. He always said that his greatest legacy wasn't his recordings or performances, but the students he trained. Your father, Sterling, was one of the last. Beatrice stood up and went to a small carved wooden chest. She opened it and took out a worn leather folder. Julian left me some of his writings and scores before he passed. There are letters he wrote to Ronald but never sent. And there are also his notes about his students. She opened the folder and flipped through some pages until she found what she was looking for. Here, Sterling has the rare gift of transforming pain into beauty through the flute. He doesn't play with his fingers, but with his soul. He reminds me of myself when I was young, before the world. Tried to teach me that music is technique, not truth. Lara felt tears in her eyes as she heard the words about her father. Mr. Julian seemed like a very special person. He was, Beatrice confirmed, and he would immediately recognize the gift you have, Lara. What you did on that stage today was pure Julian magic. They spent the next few hours working on the piece Lara would perform that evening. They didn't focus on correcting technical flaws or polishing her execution, but on deepening the emotional connection with the music, on finding the truth behind the notes. Around 4 in the afternoon, Paul Martin called Beatrice's cell phone. "Professor, we need you at the theatre for a technical rehearsal." When they arrived at the Royal Pavilion Theatre, the backstage atmosphere was bustling. Technicians adjusted lights and sound. Nervous competitors practiced in isolated corners. Paul came to greet them. "Change of plans," he announced, not hiding his excitement. "This morning's duel went viral on social media. TV stations want to broadcast it live. The theatre is already packed with a waiting list." Lara felt a chill in her stomach. It was one thing to play for a few people, quite another to perform for the entire country. "And there's more," Paul continued. "Ronald Vance, as president of the jury, decided to change the rules for you. Instead of a free piece like the other candidates, you will have to perform a compulsory piece chosen by him." "That's not fair," Beatrice protested. "The rules can't be changed like that at the last minute." Paul shrugged. It was his condition to keep the scholarship promise. "And let's face it, this story is generating incredible publicity for the competition." "What's the piece?" Lara asked, her voice small but determined. Paul consulted a paper. "Brazilian Bachianas No. 5, by Villa-Lobos, arrangement for solo flute. One of the most complex pieces in the Brazilian repertoire." Beatrice paled. That composition, a fusion of Bacchian structure with Brazilian melodies, required a technical mastery that took years to acquire. It was a clearly calculated choice to make Lara fail. "He can't do this," Beatrice murmured. "It's cruel." "I can try," Lara said, surprising both of them. "My father always said that when music is true, even the impossible bends." Paul smiled, impressed by the girl's courage. "Technical rehearsals begin in 20 minutes. You have that time to prepare." When he walked away, Beatrice knelt to be at Lara's height. "Listen, dear. This is an extremely difficult piece. Ronald is trying to sabotage your performance. Maybe we should protest. Demand that you play the same piece you performed this morning." Lara shook her head. "If I do that, he'll say I'm scared. That I'm not good enough for real music. I want to try, Professor. For my father, for Master Julian, and for the music." Beatrice observed Lara with a mixture of admiration and concern. This girl, only 8 years old, raised in the outskirts of Brighton with a mended flute, was willing to face a challenge that would make professional musicians tremble. There was something of Master Julian in her, a courage that went beyond common sense. "Let's go to the dressing room," the professor decided. "We have little time, but we'll do our best." In the small dressing room assigned to Lara, Beatrice took a worn copy of the Brazilian Bachianas No. 5 score from her bag. It was marked in pencil, with notes in the margins, her own study copy from years ago. "This piece was originally composed for soprano and a cello ensemble," she explained. "The arrangement for solo flute is extremely challenging, because the instrument needs to translate both the vocal line and suggest the accompaniment." Lara looked at the score, intimidated by the density of notes and symbols. Beatrice noticed her discomfort. "You read music, don't you?" "A little," Lara admitted. "My father taught me the basics, but I learned more by ear. He said that a score is like a map, but the real music is in the journey, not on the paper." Beatrice smiled. That was a typical Julian Oliver phrase. Your father was right, but in this case, we need the map so we don't get completely lost. She played a few notes on her own flute, which she had brought with her. "I'll play excerpts for you to listen and repeat. Don't worry about every note. Focus on the essence of the melody." The next few hours were intense work. Beatrice divided the complex piece into small fragments, played them slowly, and Lara tried to reproduce them. The girl had an extraordinary ear and could grasp the musical phrases with surprising speed, although the execution on her damaged flute was irregular. "Excellent, Lara!" exclaimed Beatrice after a particularly successful passage. "You have the natural gift your father had. Master Julian would be proud." A gentle knock on the door interrupted the rehearsal. It was Mrs. Joanna, accompanied by Paul Martin. Lara's mother's face showed signs of tiredness and worry, but her eyes shone with pride. "Mum!" Lara ran to hug her. "My daughter, when you called telling me what happened, I could barely believe it. I asked for time off work and came as fast as I could." Paul Martin smiled, pleased with this additional dramatic element for his show. "Mrs. Rivers, your daughter is the talk of the town today. The video of this morning's duel already has over 1 million views on social media." "The important thing is that my daughter is well," Joanna replied, stroking Lara's hair. "This world of contests and television is not for us." "It can become so," Beatrice intervened. "Your daughter has extraordinary talent, Mrs. Joanna. With the right education, she can go very far." Joanna looked at the professor with a mixture of gratitude and distrust. Beatrice understood her apprehension. How many times had people from poor communities heard promises that never materialized? "I'm Beatrice Wells, a retired music professor," she formally introduced herself. "I knew your husband Sterling many years ago through my great friend, Master Julian Oliver." Joanna's face softened at the mention of those names. "Sterling always spoke of the master with such affection. Those were his happiest days, those choro circles at the Brighton Market Hall." "And how is he?" Beatrice asked with genuine concern. Joanna's expression saddened. "The factory accident was very serious. The doctors did what they could, but he can no longer work. He spends most of his time in the hospital fighting every day." Paul, noticing the emotional atmosphere, discreetly cleared his throat. "Ladies, the technical rehearsal will begin in 10 minutes. Lara needs to be on stage." Beatrice nodded. "Of course. Mrs. Joanna, you are welcome to attend the rehearsal. Afterwards, we can continue our preparation." On the main stage, technicians adjusted microphones and lights. Lara was positioned in the center, under an intense spotlight. Her small figure, barefoot and holding the dented flute, seemed even more fragile under the vastness of the stage. "A little further to the right," the stage director instructed, "and hold the flute higher, so the cameras can capture it well." As they adjusted her position, Lara saw Ronald Vance discreetly entering from the back of the theater. He observed everything with an impassive expression, but his eyes betrayed a contained satisfaction at seeing the girl trying to adjust to the scenic demands. The rehearsal was quick, just to define positions, check sound capture and adjust lighting. When it finished, Ronald approached the stage. "I hope you're ready for tonight, little one," he said with false cordiality, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The Brazilian Bachianas No. 5 is a masterpiece by our greatest composer. He would be ashamed to see it dishonored by an inadequate performance." Beatrice, who was watching from the front row, stood up. "The choice of this piece was deliberately unfair, Ronald. You know that very well." Ronald smiled coldly. "Life is unfair, Professor. The sooner this child learns that, the better. If she wants to enter the world of classical music, she needs to face its real challenges, not little neighborhood contests. Or perhaps you're afraid of being surpassed again." "As you were this morning," Beatrice retorted. "Your father would never approve of what you're doing." The mention of Master Julian made Ronald's face harden. "Don't you dare mention my father. He chose his path, I chose mine. And look where we are. I'm on the stages of the world. He's forgotten even by those who claim to love him." "He's not forgotten," Lara intervened, surprising everyone. "My father talks about him every day. He says he learned more about music from Master Julian in 1 year than he would in a lifetime in conservatories." Ronald turned to the girl, his eyes flashing with contained anger. "Your father was one of his street students, wasn't he? Those for whom my father wasted his talent teaching for free, when he could have been one of the great names in world music." "My father says Master Julian was one of the great names in music," Lara replied with surprising firmness for her age. "But his greatness wasn't in the theaters, but in people's hearts." A tense silence followed this declaration. Paul Martin, who observed the scene fascinated, discreetly signaled the cameraman to keep recording. That material was gold for the event's promotion. "We need to continue our preparation," Beatrice intervened, placing herself protectively beside Lara. "The performance is in a few hours." Ronald stepped back, regaining his elegant composure. "Of course, I don't want to interfere. See you later, little flutist. I hope the Bachianas aren't excessively challenging for you." When he walked away, Mrs. Joanna approached the stage, her face marked by worry. "Daughter, I think we should go home. This man isn't kidding. He wants to humiliate you in front of everyone." Lara looked at her mother, then at Beatrice, and finally at her dented flute. For a moment, doubt clouded her eyes. But then something changed in her expression. "Mom, remember what Dad always said? The most beautiful music comes from broken places. My flute is broken. Our life has been broken since his accident. But we can still make beautiful music." Joanna hugged her daughter, silent tears streaming down her face. "Your father would be so proud of you, my little one." Beatrice watched the scene, deeply moved. The child's determination reminded her so much of Julian in his youth, when he fought for Brazilian music to be valued for its truth, not for its conformity to European standards. "Let's go back to the dressing room," the professor suggested. "We have work to do." The Royal Pavilion Theatre was completely packed. The buzz of the audience echoed through the imposing space as lighting technicians made final adjustments. In the front rows, music critics, journalists, and Brighton cultural personalities eagerly awaited the start of the competition that had become the most talked-about event in the city. Backstage, competitors adjusted instruments and rehearsed final passages, nervous about the unexpected presence of television cameras. The Brighton's Rising Stars competition, which would normally only attract local attention, had become a national phenomenon thanks to the morning duel between the renowned flutist Ronald Vance and little Lara Rivers. From the Seagull Heights community. In the improvised dressing room, Lara breathed deeply, trying to control her nervousness. Beatrice adjusted the colorful adhesive tape that held the flute together, while Mrs. Joanna carefully braided her daughter's hair. "Remember what we practiced," Beatrice said softly. "Don't try to play every note perfectly. Tell the story the music wants to tell." Lara nodded, pressing the flute against her chest. "I'm going to play for Dad, as if he could hear me from the hospital." "He can," Joanna smiled, finishing the braid. "His heart always hears your music, my daughter." A stage assistant knocked on the door, announcing that the competition would begin in 5 minutes. Beatrice gave Lara a final hug. "Master Julian will be with you on stage," she whispered. "I know it." The competition format had been altered to accommodate the final duel between Ronald and Lara. After the other competitors' performances, there would be an intermission, followed by the grand confrontation everyone was waiting for. Lara watched the performances from backstage. They were talented young people, mostly teenagers from conservatories and music schools, with refined technique and quality instruments. With each impeccable performance, her nervousness increased. How could she compete with that level of preparation and refinement? When the last regular competitor finished their performance, Paul Martin went on stage. The producer was in his element, savoring every second of this unprecedented attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, after a brief intermission, we will witness the duel that has captured the imagination of the country. The virtuoso Ronald Vance and the surprising Lara Rivers, performing Villa-Lobos's Brazilian Bachianas No. 5. Enthusiastic applause filled the theatre. Backstage, Ronald meticulously adjusted his silver and gold flute, checking each key with millimeter precision. Seeing Lara watching him, he smiled condescendingly. "Are you ready to learn your lesson, little one?" Before Lara could respond, an elderly woman approached. She wore a simple but elegant outfit, and her white hair was arranged in a traditional bun. There was a natural dignity in her posture, and her eyes, despite her age, were lively and penetrating. "Ronald," she said, with a calm but firm voice. The flutist visibly paled. "Aunt Constance, what are you doing here?" "I came to see how far you would go with this." "Display of wounded pride," the lady replied. She then turned to Lara. "And you must be the girl who is making my nephew remember his roots, even against his will." "I'm Lara Rivers, madam," she replied timidly. "Constance Oliver," the elderly woman introduced herself. "Julian Oliver's sister." Lara's eyes widened. She was standing before the sister of the legendary master her father revered so much. You knew my father, Sterling Rivers, the blacksmith's son who became a factory worker?" "Of course I did. One of my brother's dearest students. Julian used to say he had music in his blood. He didn't need conservatories to teach what he was born knowing." Ronald interrupted the dialogue. "Aunt, this is not the place for you." This is a serious competition, not one of your weekend choro circles. Constance looked at him with profound sadness. I see you're still the same, nephew. Your father passed away heartbroken, knowing that his only son had become exactly the kind of musician he most despised. Technically perfect, spiritually empty. My father chose his path, I chose mine, Ronald replied dryly. And time has shown who was right. Time has not finished telling that story yet, Constance retorted with a meaningful look at Lara. The call to return to the stage interrupted the tense conversation. Paul Martin introduced Ronald with great enthusiasm, highlighting his international awards and his position as one of the greatest flutists in the world. Polite applause echoed through the theatre as he took his place center stage. Ronald performed the Brazilian Bachianas No. 5 with extraordinary technical precision. Every note was perfectly placed, every musical phrase meticulously constructed. It was like watching a Swiss watchmaker demonstrating the perfection of his craft. Impressive, but strangely distant, as if music were a mathematical equation to be solved, not an expression of the soul. When he finished, he received respectful applause, but there was no ovation that normally accompanied his performances. Something had changed in the public's perception after the morning's duel. And now, Paul announced, the young sensation who captured hearts this morning, Lara Rivers. Lara walked slowly to the center of the stage, her bare feet barely making a sound on the wooden floor. The audience fell completely silent, creating an almost palpable atmosphere of anticipation. The first notes were hesitant, trembling. The technical complexity of the piece was too evident, and the damaged flute didn't help. At times the sound failed completely, and at others it came out too shrill. From the audience, whispers of discomfort could be heard. Ronald, sitting in the front row, couldn't hide a smile of satisfaction. His plan was working. The girl was being exposed in her lack of technical preparation, in her naivety in thinking that emotion could replace years of disciplined study. But then, something unexpected happened. Lara stopped playing. She lowered the flute and took a deep breath, closing her eyes. A stunned silence fell over the theatre. She gave up, someone whispered in the audience. Lara opened her eyes, looking directly at the audience. This isn't my music, she said, her voice small but clear. This isn't the music my father taught me. This isn't the music Master Julian taught my father. A murmur ran through the theatre. Paul Martin, nervous about the unexpected turn, gestured to the sound technicians, but they seemed equally surprised to react. I want to play a song I learned from my father, Lara continued. A song he learned from Master Julian Oliver. At this moment, Constance Oliver stood up from her seat in the audience. Let the girl play. Ronald also stood up, visibly irritated. This is absurd. We have rules, technical criteria to follow. Rules? Constance's voice echoed through the theatre. Rules were made to be fair, nephew, not to crush a child's spirit. Constance walked to the stage, her steps slow but determined. She took the microphone from the hands of a stunned Paul Martin. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Constance Oliver, sister of Julian Oliver, one of the greatest flutists this country has ever produced, although few of you know his name. My brother dedicated his life to teaching music to children like Lara, children who didn't have access to expensive conservatories or imported instruments. He believed that true Brazilian music wasn't in concert halls, but in the streets, in the squares, in community gathering places, in choro circles, in the heart of the people. The theatre was in complete silence now, everyone mesmerized by the presence of the elderly woman. My nephew Ronald, she continued, pointing to the flutist, was also a student of his father, the most talented of all. But he chose another path, the path of perfect technique, of European concert halls, of the applause of the elite. He abandoned everything his father represented. Ronald advanced, trying to take the microphone. This is a music show, not a family court. When Julian was on his deathbed, Constance continued, ignoring the interruption, his last words were for his absent son. He said, "Tell Ronald that true music still awaits him when he is ready to hear it." A heavy silence fell over the theatre. Ronald seemed petrified, his face a mask of contradictory emotions. This girl's father, Constance pointed to Lara, Sterling Rivers, was one of my brother's last students. Julian used to say he had the rare gift of making the flute sing with the voice of truth. And from what I saw this morning, His daughter inherited that gift. She handed the microphone back to Lara. "Play for us, child. Play the music your father taught you." Lara closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of all eyes on her. It was no longer a simple competition. It was the meeting of two worlds, of two visions of music and life. With a calm that surprised even herself, she brought the dented flute to her lips. "This music is called Song for a Distant Son," she announced. "Master Julian composed it when Ronald was born, and my father kept it like a treasure." The first notes floated through the theatre, a simple melody, almost like a lullaby, but laden with a deep melancholy. It didn't have the technical complexity of the Bachianas, but it possessed something rarer, an emotional truth impossible to ignore. As the music progressed, it subtly transformed, like a story being told. There was love in the first measures, hope in the development, and a growing sadness at the end, like an unwanted farewell. Lara played with her eyes closed, as if she were seeing the story unfold behind her eyelids. In the audience, not a sound was heard. Beatrice in the wings wept silently. Mrs. Joanna held Constance's hand, both united by the emotion of the moment. But it was on Ronald's face that the deepest transformation occurred. The famous flutist, always so controlled, so self-assured, seemed to crumble with each note. His face, once a mask of superiority, now revealed layers of long-suppressed emotion. When the melody reached its most emotional point, a section where the lullaby transformed into a kind of lament, Ronald took a step forward, stumbling, as if each note were a physical blow. His eyes, teary, fixed on Lara as if she were an apparition. The little flutist, absorbed in the music, didn't notice his approach. She continued playing, letting the dented flute tell the story of a father and son, separated not by distance, but by misunderstanding. When she reached the final notes, a return to the initial theme, now softer, like a painful acceptance, Lara opened her eyes. She saw Ronald in front of her, kneeling on the stage, tears streaming freely down his face. The last note dissipated into the air, leaving an absolute silence in the theatre. For several seconds no one moved, as if everyone feared breaking the spell. It was Ronald who finally broke the silence. He slowly stood up and took the microphone from Lara's hands, who watched him with a mixture of surprise and compassion. "This melody," he began, his voice choked with emotion. "My father used to whistle it when I was very young. I had completely forgotten." He paused, searching for words. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we witnessed here today goes beyond a music competition. This child," he pointed to Lara, "not only won our technical duel this morning, she has just won something much more difficult, the barrier I built around my own heart." The audience remained in absolute silence, mesmerized by the transformation of this man who had always seemed so inaccessible, so distant from common emotions. My father, Julian Oliver, was a man who believed that music should be for everyone. He played in squares, taught for free, rejected the elitism that I later embraced. When I received the opportunity to study in Europe, I saw it as my chance to escape what I considered the mediocrity of his life. Constance approached the stage, her eyes shining with contained tears. Ronald extended his hand to his aunt, inviting her to join him. "I spent years building a career based on perfect technique, elegant concert halls, the critiques of experts. I achieved everything I thought I wanted. But today this girl showed me what I lost along the way." He turned to Lara. "You didn't just win a flute duel. Little Lara, you brought music back to my heart." The theatre erupted in emotional applause. Paul Martin, always attentive to dramatic potential, approached with a new microphone. "Does this mean Lara Rivers is the official winner of the competition?" Ronald smiled, a genuine smile that few had seen before. "Lara won from the very first note she played this morning. She will receive her full scholarship to study at the best music school in the country as promised. But I will go further. Today I announce the creation of the Julian Oliver Foundation, which will offer free music education to children from the communities of Brighton." More applause, now accompanied by exclamations of surprise and approval. Constance embraced her nephew, decades of estrangement crumbling in that gesture. "Your father is listening, Ronald," she whispered. "He's finally listening." In the months that followed, Brighton witnessed a transformation. The old Harmony Instruments factory, where Sterling Rivers had worked and suffered the accident, was acquired by Ronald and completely renovated. The industrial building, once a symbol of exploitation and inequality, was reborn as the Julian Oliver Cultural Center. The inauguration, on a sunny Sunday afternoon, attracted hundreds of people. Children from the Siegel Heights community and other peripheral neighborhoods arrived with new instruments, donated by the foundation, or with improvised and mended instruments, all equally welcome. Beatrice Wells took over as pedagogical director, bringing decades of experience in music education. Constance Oliver coordinated the administration, ensuring that her brother's principles were respected. Mrs. Joanna, hired as the center's manager, was finally able to leave the exhaustive jobs she performed to support her family. And Lara, the little flutist, divided her time between formal classes at the Brighton Conservatory of Music, where her scholarship opened new technical horizons, and afternoons at the Cultural Center, where she helped teach the younger beginners. Sterling Rivers, after months of specialized treatment funded by the foundation, was finally able to leave the hospital. He still faced limitations due to the accident, but his presence at the Cultural Center was a constant source of inspiration. Sitting in the shade of a mango tree in the inner courtyard, he supervised choro circles where veteran musicians and child apprentices played side by side. The greatest transformation, however, happened in Ronald Vance. The internationally acclaimed flutist cancelled a European tour to dedicate himself fully to the project. He exchanged his silver and gold flute for an old metal instrument that had belonged to his father. Not as technically perfect, but with a sound that, as he himself said, carries the history of those who played it. Every morning, before the students arrived, Ronald practiced alone in the center's main auditorium. Always the same piece, Song for a Distant Sun. Each day, his interpretation became less technical and more emotional, as if he were relearning the language of true music. On the day of the Cultural Center's first anniversary celebration, the inner courtyard was decorated with colorful flags and paper lanterns. Long tables held plates of traditional Brighton food, prepared by women from the community. Children ran among the adults, some carrying instruments almost bigger than themselves. Ronald went up to the small stage set up for the occasion. Beside him, Lara, who at 9 years old already demonstrated impressive musical maturity. "A year ago, a child taught me what decades of conservatories couldn't," he began. "She taught me that music doesn't come from technical perfection, but from emotional truth. That broken places, as her father used to say, are the cradles of the most authentic beauty." He paused, observing the attentive faces in the audience. "I found among my father's belongings a letter he never gave me. It was to be opened when I was ready to listen. I think I finally am." With slightly trembling hands, Ronald unfolded a paper yellowed by time. "Dearest son, if you are reading this letter, it is because you have finally understood that music is not just a path to recognition, but a bridge to the soul. I was always proud of your extraordinary talent, even when our visions separated us. The music I composed when you were born, Song for a Distant Sun, was always yours, always will be yours. Play it when you feel you have lost your way, and it will bring you back home. With eternal love, your father." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtyard. Ronald carefully folded the letter and put it in his pocket. "Today I will not play as the virtuoso Ronald Vance," he announced. "I will play as Julian Oliver's son, as a student of all of you, who taught me again the meaning of true music." He and Lara played Song for a Distant Sun together, he on his time-worn flute, she on her dented instrument, mended with colorful adhesive tape. It was not a technically perfect performance, but it carried an emotional truth that made the music transcend its individual notes. At the end of the performance, dozens of young flutists joined them on stage, each with their instrument, some new and shiny. Others improvised and mended, all equally precious. Together they played Pixington's Meditation, the same piece Lara had chosen that first morning at the Royal Pavilion Theatre, when it all began. From the audience, Joanna watched her daughter with tears of pride. Beside her, Sterling, still weakened but with eyes shining with happiness, held her hand. "Our sacrifice was worth it," he whispered. "It was worth every second," Joanna replied. On stage, the music swelled, enveloping everyone present. Ronald and Lara exchanged a look of mutual understanding, teacher and student, both apprentices of the same truth, that the most beautiful music is born in broken places, that technique without soul is just organized noise, and that sometimes we need a child to remind us of the deepest truths we forget along the way. The Julian Oliver Cultural Center flourished in the following years. A girl rescued from a shelter revealed she had perfect pitch and became a promising pianist. A teenager who flirted with crime found in Baroque music the peace he had never known on the streets. Twins from the periphery formed a choro duo that began to gain national recognition. Master Julian's legacy, transmitted through Sterling, through Lara and finally reclaimed by Ronald, was firmly established. Music as truth, broken places as the cradle of beauty, and a song from father to son, returned by a child with a dented flute and an immense heart.